Hello, this is lesson 4 for anatomy and physiology, and today we're going to start the endocrine system. So in this lesson, we're really going to talk about what hormones are, how they work, and then we're going to focus on one particular endocrine organ called the pituitary gland. So we just finished up the nervous system in our last lessons. The endocrine system is your second great controlling system behind the nervous system. And one of the major objectives for this lesson is being able to compare and contrast the endocrine system with the nervous system. So the endocrine system uses hormones instead of nerve impulses. And then endocrinology is the study of hormones and the endocrine organs. So if you have diabetes, for example, you go to an endocrinologist a lot of times to help manage that. These are your major endocrine organs, and there is a section on your note guide where you can label all of these organs, and we're really going to talk about every single one of these and what individual hormones get released from all of them. This lesson focuses on the pituitary gland right here, which is this little tiny gland in the brain, and that was your picture on this video, these introduction videos. So hormones are chemical substances that are going to be secreted by the endocrine cells. And what's kind of interesting is really these hormones get released out into tissues from the cells, and then they enter the bloodstream and can travel to different cells in the body. For example, we just talked about the pituitary gland in the last slide. It releases hormones that travel all over your body, even as down as the ovaries and testes. And hormones can be classified as amino acid based or steroids, and we're going to talk about the difference between those. So amino acid based steroids are going to be protein based hormones, and steroids are going to be made from cholesterol and are going to include all of your sex hormones. There is one other class of hormones called prostaglandins. These are local hormones that are released from basically all different types of cells, and then they kind of just stay in that area. A lot of times they're produced by non-endocrine organs. For example, your heart produces a hormone that we talk about when we get into the cardiovascular system. That would be a prostaglandin because it's not necessarily coming from an endocrine organ. So we're going to talk about how hormones actually work. And there's a few things that we need to talk about first, and one is called a target cell. Target cells are the specific cells or organs that the hormone is going to have an effect on. For example, you release a hormone called the growth hormone from your pituitary gland. That's going to travel to your bones. Your bones are going to be the target cell or the organ that that hormone is going to have an effect on. And we talk about that a lot because hormones are released to have an effect in your body. So we need to really be specific in what target cell or organ that is. So what do hormones do? Well, one, they can change the plasma membrane permeability, meaning that cell can now let in or out more items. Synthesis of proteins, so making proteins, and remember that hormones are actually a class of proteins. Activation and inactivation of enzymes to speed up chemical processes and also maybe start certain metabolic pathways. The stimulation of mitosis, which is cell division, and then the promotion of secretory activity, so making that cell or target cell or organ release something. We also need to talk about negative feedback mechanisms again. This is going way back to Anatomy 1. We need to know that nearly all hormones work in a negative feedback mechanism. This is pretty much how it's always going to be. It's very rare that we see these positive negative feedbacks. So what happens is something is going to change in your body. It can be a change, for example, it can be low blood calcium levels. That's your change or your stimulus. We want to stop or reduce that stimulus. We don't want our blood calcium levels to keep dropping. We want to get them back to normal. So we release a certain hormone that will help bring that blood calcium level back up. So we're reducing or stopping what's happening to us. That's a negative feedback mechanism. And I think people often get confused because they hear that word negative and they think bad. They think it's bad. But really, all negative feedback means is that you're trying to stop whatever change is occurring in your body. So endocrine glands can activate different organs by 3 ways: hormonal, humoral, and neural. So first we're going to talk about hormonal stimuli. This is when one hormone causes the release of another hormone to occur. For example, you have a hypothalamus in your brain. It's a little structure that's going to stimulate the pituitary gland to secrete its own hormones, which then stimulate other organs to release other hormones into the blood. So it's really just hormones causing other hormones to be released. That's why we call it the hormonal stimuli. So let's look. We're looking at picture A here, which is the hormonal stimuli. So here's your hypothalamus. Okay, the hypothalamus is actually going to secrete its own hormone that stimulates your anterior pituitary gland. Your anterior pituitary gland can then go to the thyroid gland. It releases a hormone called the thyroid stimulating hormone, which then stimulates the thyroid gland to release a metabolic hormone, or the thyroid hormone. So the release of this hormone here from the anterior pituitary gland actually stimulates the release of this hormone here. So it's one hormone stimulating another hormone. Then we have humoral stimuli. This is that example we kind of talked about with blood calcium levels. This is when certain ions, so we're talking about sodium, potassium, calcium, those are your common ions found in your blood. When those change, they're going to stimulate a hormone to be released to bring them back up to normal. So you have these little tiny glands on your thyroid called parathyroid glands. And if you have decreasing blood calcium levels, then the parathyroid hormone gets released to bring your blood calcium levels back up. So that calcium being low stimulated the parathyroid hormone to be released. Okay, so now we're looking at letter B here. This is when we can actually look and we have low calcium in the blood here. Here's your parathyroid glands. They can sense that you have very low blood calcium in your blood. So what they do is they release the parathyroid gland to bring it back up. So low ion calcium caused the secretion of this hormone. And then last we have neural stimuli, and you can probably guess what this is. It's your nervous system, nerve fibers actually stimulating hormone release. And we have talked about this in the nervous system already. So this is your sympathetic nervous system stimulating your adrenal medulla to release epinephrine, which remember is adrenaline, to be into the bloodstream. So that's picture C. So here we go. We have nerve fibers that are going to innervate the adrenal medulla. Remember, these are little glands that sit on top of your kidneys. And once it innervates that adrenal gland, it causes it to release epinephrine and norepinephrine into your bloodstream. So the nervous system is causing the release of a hormone. So now we're really going to get into the major endocrine organs. Before we do that, let's just review really quickly about what we talked about. We talked about how the endocrine system uses hormones instead of nerve impulses. It's much slower than the nervous system, which is something to think about, and it's the second major controlling system of the body. Then we talked about how hormones are released from glands and can stimulate other hormones to be released. And now we're going to talk about all these major endocrine organs. The next video is really going to focus on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, because they go hand in hand. And the pituitary gland, you're like, oh my gosh, one video just on one gland. This gland here is your master gland. It's a giant gland. So we'll do a little introduction to it, and then the next video will focus on all the different hormones. So your pituitary gland is actually in your brain. It hangs from the hypothalamus. It's very small. It's approximately the size of a pea. And we call it the master gland. And that's because it releases a bunch of different hormones that really control a lot of different aspects of your body. And there's two lobes, and this is very important to understand and know here. So the anterior pituitary is made of glandular tissue. It makes and secretes its own hormone. The posterior pituitary, remember posterior means behind, is different. It's made of nervous tissue, and it actually just stores hormones. It doesn't make its own hormones. So if we look here, here's our little pituitary gland. Very, very tiny. And then as you can see, it just hangs off of the hypothalamus here. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and stop video 1 here, and video 2 will pick up, and we're gonna talk about all the different hormones that this master gland secretes.